Well, all right then. Welcome to another episode of Prototype. It is episode 10. We're into the double digits, and for now, we're calling this episode Lobotomized because lobotomy mines are in. I'm recording this, of course, on the 11th of May, 2023, towards the tail end of the day. And yesterday is when I decided to actually re-implement lobotomy mines. They used to be on the Eidolon, so some trivia there for you if you haven't been following the project for ever and a day. But the main thing that the lobotomy mine does that the spider mine doesn't is instead of doing damage, it stuns targets for 2 seconds and slows them for 4 seconds afterwards. So this is significant because obviously it gives you this fairly lengthy period of time where you can get this combat advantage. Although if they decide to stand and fight you, then you're obviously not really losing much of anything. I mean, they can't kite you, but besides that, everything seems to be working fine, right? It's not like it slows their attack speed. So what the lobotomy mine does is obviously offer counterplay, I guess you could say, instead of you just losing your army or your worker line for that matter. There are a few rough things about it, like the fact that it will remove the order that is currently in the unit, but it will, like, if you queue an order, the queued order will just become the next order. It, like, removes just whatever passive order it had. This is significant because it means you'll have to retask your workers until we fix that. So it is a little bit obnoxious, and I guess if you know that, you can then use it to be really obnoxious towards human players. But generally speaking, for the most part, it's not going to be too difficult. Just right now, it's like a little bit of an APM/awareness tax on your army when facing off against Terrans who have gone mines. Now, there's a reason why we removed spider mines, and there's a separate reason why we added lobotomy mines, and I'll get into that in this episode, as well as talking about a couple of other ideas or things that have happened. So up first, I suppose we can talk about why we removed spider mines, and I think the main answer is volatility. This is a word I wasn't really using per se to describe their experience within the game myself, but Fagudo on a dev stream recently, earlier today actually, had mentioned that spider mines introduced a lot of volatility to the early game, as just the word he used to describe it. And I think it's a good way to describe it. It's, volatility and also versatility. Spider mines actually are really good, even if they don't blow up in your face, right? Like, you think about the fact that they serve as a warning sign for when an enemy is starting to attack you with ground units, but also with the map aware players, you can place them in key locations where air units are likely to rotate, and they can be, anti-drop or anti-harassment warnings. And I think that's a pretty big deal too, right? They're essentially vision wards, if you're familiar with MOBAs, but they're doing so in a way that also happens to deal damage to ground units if they happen to go there. And that's a pretty big deal too. So all this to be said, it's actually a pretty significant amount of power concentrated into one unit that just lays them. And then on top of it, the Vulture isn't too shabby stats-wise. So these things kind of coalesce into this picture that certainly makes Vultures a very powerful and potent unit that you don't want to skip. And on the one hand, that's fine. But on the other hand, it's a little bit overloaded. I think with this change where lobotomy mines now still require you to actually dive in onto the stunned/slowed targets and deal some damage to them with your vultures or with something else that also works alongside the vulture or whatever, it gives you this window of opportunity that allows you to take an advantage in terms of combat, but it doesn't give you the combat advantage, right? And so I kind of likened this to the whole thematic of the vulture. If you think about what a vulture actually is, it's something that goes in for the kill only on very wounded or weakened targets, and otherwise just sticks around to pick the bones, so to speak, right? And if you're going to have that kind of feeling, then spider mines would basically need to do limited damage so that they didn't do that much damage, so that the vulture still had to be there to finish them off, right? 125 damage is not a small amount of damage. And if we changed it to just be like 40 damage, then I feel like it would just always be unsatisfying because we're all used to the method where it just blows up and destroys a bunch of stuff. And on top of it, I still don't know that it wouldn't just still be an issue eventually. I mean, you are talking about a game that unfortunately has cases where units can clump up infinitely. And we're talking about workers here, obviously. So it doesn't really matter that maybe you would need a couple of worker hits or mine hits to kill a worker. It would still end up being a problem potentially, and it would definitely still be really weird and silly. And if we decided to increase the mine count to make up for that, then it would just end up being this weird sort of APM tax for actually using the vulture to begin with. Like if you have a permanent like one mine every 30 seconds replenishes or something. I don't know what the rule would be exactly. It would just be this sort of like similar to a macro mechanic in StarCraft 2, like spamming larva injects or whatever. It's like, yeah, I guess every 30 seconds I have to do this or I fall behind. And that's kind of lame and definitely not really where I want to put the game. So beyond that, it's also like, okay, well, there's a lot of reasons why we can't just take the Spider-Man concept and make it more sane. I also think that since we've improved unit responsivity by making it so that they don't just sort of ignore targets within their attack range effectively, because obviously the order timers made it essentially random when the units would actually attack at their maximum range and when they would just like delay before acquiring the target. And we fixed that internally, and that made mines really easy to automatically attack move. And that's just because the game was being a bit more responsive. Now, you don't want to make the game intentionally less responsive to combat this. So what we ended up doing was just increasing the durability of the mine. But this had a knock-on effect where, depending on what you happen to have, like say you had a bunch of workers lying around, it might be really challenging for you to actually kill the mine before it arms and then blows up your whole worker line, because all you have is a bunch of workers. So you might not be able to deal the 40 damage required. I mean, that's, in air quotes, only 8 hits of the worker attack because it's 5 damage. So that's not a crazy amount of damage that you have to do. And it's not a crazy amount of attacks you have to hit. But if you're not immediately on the ball, if you don't respond immediately, like, it just introduces that volatility again. And even if it didn't kill your worker and instead just damaged your worker, I think it would still be pretty significant. I mean, each vulture would have 2 mines. Are we going to make it so that it deals, 3 mine hits before 1 worker dies? Probably not. That's probably not how we're going to go. So, like, in theory, and anywhere that I can see preserving Spider-Mine on the vulture kind of makes me feel like it would 100% still, at most it would 2-hit workers and vultures would retain 2 mines. So it would still be a problem. And I think that the lobotomy mine in general gives you this different experience where, as a result, right? So this is where we get into the reasons to actually use lobotomy mines instead of using spider mines. It gives you this utility, it gives you this map control. It obviously delays your enemy's forces, but not in a way that's actually lethal unless you're in an area to capitalize on it. It also allows you to better, enjoy the synergy of different compositions. You think about, stimming a bunch of Mavericks forward to deal a lot of damage to some stunned targets. And, if they're melee units like Zethrakors or whatever, Zealots, etc., then they can't even, close the gap to attack your Mavericks as fast because of the slow. So that actually works out really well and starts to synergize with that. You think about Wraiths chasing down targets, maybe dragging targets into the mines. You think about other mech units that can keep up with vultures, at the very least on a baseline level, and maybe dive forward with the vultures once the lobotomy mines kick in. I just feel like that makes a lot more sense. And so that's sort of the way that I think about vultures, lobotomy mines, spider mines, etc. The other core issue beyond the usability thing of the whole like order getting cleared or whatever is that AI will be really bad at actually capitalizing on you getting locked down by a lobotomy mine. And they're also going to be really bad at placing them still. So it's not really going to be that different than how they normally work, I guess. But AI being bad at something is definitely a spot where we want to improve things. And actually, that kind of brings me to a little bit of a different topic altogether. It is Veek's work on Kairos. And I believe that's how you pronounce the name anyway. It's the name of his language that he was originally going to use exclusively for AI. And now we're not 100% sure if that scripting language will be used for other things. Like, map triggers seems like a very high likelihood. Also, we have things like the potential. We're not sure about it yet, even though it's been translated into bytecode. But there's the potential that maybe we could use that for like abilities or something. It doesn't seem likely right now, but who knows what's going to happen with that. And the other thing is, it could very easily, or maybe not so easily, it could at some point be ported to a CMBW from Antikythera. And this could allow us to actually really heavily improve AI and how AI work. The other thing that this could allow us to do is, do a bunch of other like trigger related things and make that a little bit more approachable or at least more reasonable. And in general, it might allow us to tap into some significant improvements, like perhaps moving like deciding where to put the vultures and stuff. Now, I still feel like a lot of this would require editor integration. You think about like, hey, my editor can paint this area, this like threat zone data onto the terrain. And that helps the AI figure out where stuff is or whatever. I guess like as a stopgap for that, you could, probably what you could do is try to like use locations or just pixel locations or whatever, like pixel area coordinates and stuff. Maybe eventually we could have something like that where it basically tells the AI like, this is a choke point, and then around choke points what you're supposed to do is lay mines and build walls or defenses or station artillery. I don't know, something like that, right? Maybe enemy choke points would also be a spot where they would like regard with suspicion, try to like set up shop on the other side. You can imagine containments and stuff. I feel like that would be useful. It would be something somewhat analogous to how a player breaks down a map and understands a map and like how to respond to stuff, right? So yeah, anyway, thoughts on that are definitely aplenty. And it would be really great to be able to significantly improve the AI, or even at the very least make it so that they at least lay their lobotomy mines more sensibly. But at the very least, it's not like they're missing out on as much because this is a nerf, like it's something where you have to be in the area to capitalize upon it. It's not something that just wins the game for you by placing the mine and getting it to pop off. It's not as binary of like, oh, here's a detector check. Do you have the detector in the right area? Well, then you're fine and there's no problem. Do you have the detector not in the right area? Well, then you might have just lost the whole game. Like that volatility is gone. But that means that lobotomy mines are explicitly less useful than spider mines. You actually have to do the killing yourself. It doesn't do any damage anymore. So when we consider that angle, like I wouldn't be surprised if this is a significant nerf to vultures or whatever, and maybe it ends up being that we should actually add in like a third mine count. I was actually thinking, should we reset the mine count to 3? Like I think the Beaver asked me this when I was implementing it, and my reasoning ahead of it was, well, we still don't know how powerful this really is. And maybe instead of doing that, I'll like make the vulture itself a little bit more significant and powerful as like a raider type unit or whatever. And then we can maybe think about like, okay, instead of raising the mine count, because when you raise the mine count, you're also increasing the amount of map control a single vulture can facilitate because now they can place a third mine somewhere. And maybe I don't necessarily want that to be the case, right? So I have to think about that too. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of considerations, but on pre-release right now, you can play with lobotomy mines. You can play against lobotomy mines. And also you can play with Cyprians only taking 2 transport space. Wink. So there's definitely been some interesting ideas. And in general, I think things are just a little bit more sensible now, which is always a nice thing. Obviously, we have yet to totally overhaul Reclamation. I guess we probably should have done that before Veek took his daily streaming challenge exceptionally seriously and started smashing endlessly, but not within CMBW. So we'll have to wait and see when that can be done. And I guess in the meantime, I'll just look for my ways of attempting to like piecemeal work on some of that stuff. And beyond that, I think it's really just a matter of, how many other things can we resolve and how many other like conceptual changes can we make. And we're going to stop really talking about lobotomy mines at this point, but that's why I front loaded it there. It is like the central epic topic to discuss. It's even in the thumbnail / overlay thing. So I hope you guys are excited about lobotomy mines, even if maybe they're not as explosive, quite literally, as spider mines. They should still hold a special place in your heart because they will still be useful. And I'm looking forward to seeing them in action. But also, the lockdown will affect air units that are on the ground units that trigger it, but it will not be triggered by air units per se, which is an interesting flourish, and I think that's good. And that concludes the spider mine / lobotomy mine talk. I am resuming recording now so that I can talk about 3D modeling, because that's another thing that has been going on recently. In the interest of disclosure, it has been a full day since the last recording, so I am now recording this in the morning of the 12th, by the way. So as this is a sacred day, as all 12ths, by the way, are, I wanted to talk about 3D modeling because it's something that I'm learning, practicing, improving upon, etc. It's something that I have recently leveraged to bring you the new Madrigal model. I have obviously edited a lot of other models, like taking the Ecclesiast and turning it into the Vagrant, or taking, the Wyvern graphic that was supplied by DF and editing it somewhat heavily. The Pythian is actually going to be a similar spot. And yeah, just in general, figuring out all these different nuances of how to make the 3D model work properly. And a lot of the advancements that you've seen have been done with the assistance of Solstice, who goes by John A on the Discord server. He's definitely been a homie in that respect. Big shouts to him, very appreciative. The other thing that it came to me when I was thinking about this too is that maybe the most impressive or involved set of things that came from the ability to use 3D, to use Blender to create stuff that needs to be done was probably the rework of the Matador, because the Matador has a turret now, it has a siege transform deployment now. That's a big deal, and I want deployments in general to be like something that happens in the Terran Arsenal. I'm thinking about adding it to the Shaman. I already conceptually have added it to the Cuirass, which I've begun a 3D model for already, and of course the Madrigal as well. And once the animations are in and I split the turret and the base, it'll actually be a transform type unit, a deployment type unit. So that's a really interesting stuff because, I mean, there's the technical achievements that have allowed us to, using reverse engineering and our know-how of how turrets work and et cetera, to actually create these kinds of things and to put the turrets into the game and et cetera. But beyond the technical side, like actually being able to generate them is a new state of being, basically. It's not something that is normally there. So I'm really appreciative and happy with the progress that I've been able to make using CMBW as that launching point for experimenting with 3D modeling. And now that I'm getting to the point where I can make entirely new models, right now it's taking me a few days to finish the Madrigal from start to finish or whatever. Like, it's taken me several days. Part of that due to the fact that I've been working on it like sporadically, an hour a day or whatever, instead of really dedicating a bunch of hours at once. But the fact that I'm able to get all of that banged out in the first place is really cool to me. It's something that I definitely wouldn't have seen develop to that degree or to that speed. And in theory, once, I'm even more and more familiar with stuff, it wouldn't really be that difficult to imagine me making a model in a lot quicker of a time, because a lot of the stuff that slows me down is not really being sure how to proceed when I need to fix topology, or, maybe I'm doing something wrong, like a lot of extrusions where maybe I should be doing Booleans and stuff more exclusively, or like adding new mesh objects, adding new primitives, etc. I don't even know all the terminology yet, but the point stands that there's progress being made. I'm definitely making not just progress, but also like tangible work that can be used in the product, in the project. And I think that's really important. So I just wanted to pay some lip service to that topic anyway, because for me, like, I'm a guy who, I really have like all these crazy ideas. I really have all of this big grandiose scope in mind. And I think about Xibalba. I think about, the Macrolon and the concept art that I've had Night of the Realm do and stuff. And it's like, the concept art, I mean, Night of the Realm is not a professional concept artist, but he was still able to produce some stuff that was pretty similar to what I had in mind. Like, we sort of collaborated on the vision, but a lot of the other changes were, me focusing on, a lot of it came from my head, and he was able to put it onto the page, basically. And, we went back and forth on some parts of the design, and sort of like, again, there was the collaboration there. But, it's concept art, it's more development material, and I also think it worked out pretty well. Like, all things considered, I thought it fit the sort of vibe I was going for like the Macrolon Light Mech and stuff, which some people may have seen that concept art floating around before. I sometimes pull it up on stream and maybe show the 3D model stuff that I've been working on and whatnot. And the reason I'm bringing all of this up is I have this fixation on the idea that I really want to have the best thing, the most perfect thing. And obviously that's not how any of this works. Like, we what we really need to do is get a bunch of, steps towards the best thing, towards the end game where we are doing stuff. And end game is even the wrong word, because it's like a ladder you keep climbing. It's a forest you keep going deeper into, Your trail doesn't end anywhere in particular. You just keep progressing. So even though, like, basically we're not at the threshold where I would be content with the art quality, like the 3D quality, I shouldn't use that as an excuse to not make 3D models of a specific thing or whatever. Like, if I feel possessed to make like a Macrolon style unit, then, I mean, why not, right? So I don't know. Like, I guess the biggest problem is when you have something that's super vague, that's like super intangible because it's just in your head, then the best thing you can do is try to learn enough skills necessary so that you can most accurately and qualitatively translate your head into reality, the thing in your head into a thing that other people can sort of integrate with. And, you can do that through text descriptions. You can do that through, concept art. You can do that through 3D models. You can do that through a video game, whatever. Like, that's sort of where I'm going. So it would be great if we could get around to doing that and make some progress in that sense. But for now, we're sort of we're on the path. It's just a little bit early days, right? And that's a little bit that's just something I got to deal with. That's just something that happens. I also should mention that if you're hearing a lot of trucks go by and stuff, it's because I have my window open. We're getting into the summer days. Eventually, I'll have to throw the air conditioner in. But for now, I get to just enjoy the light fan on the low power mode that's barely perceptible auditorily, and then I get to enjoy the open window, which obviously has a little bit more audio presence. But yeah, 3D modeling has been a success story so far, and even if, there's improvements that can be made, like I'm still learning what the significance of sharp edges are in a model for hard surface, and I'm still learning, like actually, the sharp edges thing, I don't think I've ever seen an explanation. I should just look that up, because one of the other things that I have to get better at doing is actually figuring out, like, what are these things? Like, what do these things mean? And how can I use them to my advantage? And so instead of just being like, well, sometimes sharp edges are in these places, I should just look up like where to put sharp edges on my mesh. So stuff like that, like I still need to improve my knowledge base and still need to improve my techniques and stuff. Like I talked about extrusions versus new meshes and, joining them or whatever. And the thing I really like about extrusions is that they're all in the same spot. So unless you actually want it to be a separate object, like you want it to be this extra bit that's on top, that's like a detail that you can like move up and down or reposition or whatever, then I feel like the extrusion part makes a lot of sense to do. But apparently not in terms of actual sane topology. So yeah, I'm sure there's like some nuance where it makes sense for topology and you just need to sort of figure it out and find the solution and stuff. But yeah, big shout out to Solstice for helping with that. I should shout out as well in the 3D space. Obviously, Balathal has recently sent me some details for how to get the tile sheets rendered, because obviously his time has been a little bit focused on other things right now, his job and stuff. So I'm trying to pick that up at some point. I haven't actually looked at them yet, but that is something that I have to do. So thinking about stuff like that, making sure that we make the progress that we need to make so that we can get this demo offline and continue progress in general on the games and stuff, that would be great. But aside from the tile sheet stuff, it's also like, obviously DF has been sending me models and he's been present during some of the modeling sessions, which is cool too. And then Veek is also, he's been learning it a little bit here and there and not spending as much time on it as I have, but, he kind of, his language or his knowledge base, I guess, is something like, it's not exact, like there's overlap between our knowledge bases, but he has enough knowledge of stuff within Blender that's like at least a little bit, perpendicular to mine or whatever. So I feel like that helps because, I might not know how some system works or some feature works, and he can be like, oh yeah, this is how it works. And that just smooths it out, right? I mean, Blender is a real fucking behemoth. One of those like similar to Unreal Engine or something. You know what I mean? It's one of those things where it's just like there's so much stuff that you have to keep in mind that it can do so many things, and it's trying to be all things to all people or whatever, right? So yeah, but that's how it is. And you know what? As much as I rag on Blender, at the very least, it can do the things that it does. And I say this as somebody who has to repeatedly restart the program because every now and then it just decides, well, you have two different monitors plugged in, and they're... No, I think I was about to give it an excuse and say that they're not both plugged into different parts of my graphics card, but that's not true. They're both HDMI ports. So, you have two monitors plugged in, and you happen to have your system configuration, so we're just going to fail to render stuff all the time, and you're going to have to restart. And we're not going to tell you when it fails to render correctly, because sometimes it's ambiguous. You might be on the wrong keyframe where you turned off ray visibility in the sprite, and you're like, oh, that means that it's not rendering because of something I did. But no, sometimes it actually is not rendering because of something Blender did, and there's no fucking difference. So visually, so you just have to like sort of figure that out and then restart the program. Great program. But besides all of that, the fact that it can do as many things as it does is pretty impressive. So I guess I have to hand it to I'll hand it to the people I know who have helped make it more sane, and those are the names that I was referencing earlier. So hats off to those gentlemen. And yeah, I think we have time for one more topic in this episode of Prototype before I jump off to get a Discord dev stream done, as well as maybe some other stuff. And actually, what I would like to do after the Discord dev stream is a tabletop dev stream, which is weird to say. And that's going to be the topic of this next little bit is I want to talk about tabletops and how they work. But first, there's a brief pause while I drink my coffee, and this pause is sponsored by you guys on the coffee page. So thanks. If you want to tune in and join us for these tabletop development streams, then you too can hop onto the coffee page. And we explore Xibalba as a setting. We continue to work on stuff like that, and we try to flesh out some ideas for adventures and mechanics and stuff for a better tabletop environment. And it's great. It's a good time, and you can always come in. But here's that awkward pause where I drink coffee. Okay, jumping straight into it. I don't like 5th edition. I don't like dice. I don't like RNG. I don't like shit that gets in the way of actually role playing, and shit that gets in the way of, trying to find in character and sensible solutions to problems. And actually, when I started doing these Big Boys tables and episodes of the Round Tabletop Talk, which we plan another episode this Saturday, we'll see if timing permits it. Something interesting happened. Mac Chaos, who's a name I know from campaign creations from way back, sent me some messaging. He was asking if I would be interested in playing a one-shot, like single session game in 5th edition. And even though I don't like 5th edition, even though I don't like RNG, even though I don't like default D&D tool sets and stuff, I said, yeah, sure, of course. Like, we got to figure out if the timing can work. Again, scheduling has to permit. But I'd always think it's good to experience something from people who, in theory have more experience with it than yourself. Like, if somebody told me, like, I was actually having this conversation with Fagudo yesterday on the stream. He said that he asked me if I was interested in playing Supreme Commander. And I don't think Supreme Commander is a very good game from everything that I've seen, including Mesk's Let's Play of Supreme Commander 2. But I look at that game as, a lot of people will say it's like, oh, I like this game instead of Brood War, or I like this game instead of, insert other RTS game that's kind of big. And so it's one of the more niche options. It's not like an Age of Empires, or a Command and Conquer, and those two are like a little bit bigger, but still not as big as Brood War, but they're like the biggest competitors to Brood War, I guess you could say. So Supreme Commander is, like an offshoot of Total Annihilation in many people's minds. The sequel to all the Supreme Commander games in many people's minds, the spiritual successor was Planetary Annihilation, which even kept the Annihilation suffix for the namesake. I know a decent amount about these games. I know that there's like the stories of how if you micro to do anything, you're, called a loser by the community and stuff. Now, I'm sure some of that is overblown, or some of that is like very specific reactions to very specific people, as opposed to it being one of those things that happens actually everywhere. So I'm sure there are some people out there who are actually interested in micro and actually interested in skill expressivity, but it's just not a series or a franchise that I've ever felt a strong attraction to. And that's to say nothing of the rather... is there a way to put it nicely? The ugly fucking art style that happens in these 3D RTS games is really not helping anything. And of course, I'm sure that the campaigns are absolute jokes. So anyway, all of this poisoning of the well, so to speak, is preparing you for me saying, yeah, I would love to play Supreme Commander. I mean, maybe not love to, but I think it would be valuable for me to play Supreme Commander in the same way that I think it would be valuable for me to play 5th edition, in this context of like, hey, this guy's, run campaigns before or whatever, and it would be cool to see what he's got. He wanted to get my opinion on some new things, and that sounds like it's right up my alley, right? Like, what kind of bespoke stuff do you have? Like, this is basically kind of similar to somebody asking me if I want to play their mod for Brood War, or if I want to play their game that's like a fan game almost of like, here's my own version of StarCraft, or here's my own version of Command and Conquer, or whatever. It's like, here's my own, successor. You think about Five Nations, they basically, like, two of their races. You can say Federation isn't Terrans, and I wouldn't necessarily care about that because, like, humans are pretty generic. But, like, the Athraels are basically Five Nations version of Protoss. And the I almost said Orlithray, but that's mine. What is the name of it? Zogarn? The Zogarn are basically that version's race of Zerg, and they have their own version of the Overmind. And, it's like, okay, well, great. That's lovely. I don't know why you had to have all the same ideas recycled, but, that's the thing. And so some people just, like, they have their own version of something, right? And they want you to... it might be valuable to see what they decided to change relative to the formula, and etc. And maybe it's just, only worth a one shot, right? Maybe it's only worth a single stream. Maybe it's only worth a single playthrough, or whatever. And, but maybe like that 5th edition stuff that I play with Matt Chaos, assuming the timing works out and the scheduling works out, that would be really cool to maybe give me some ideas for like what doesn't work. And now I'll have more recent experience with all these things that I say I don't like, and I can tell you, oh, maybe I was actually overly critical, or, more likely I can give you more articulate reasons why it's stupid. I have a feeling that anything to do with dice rolls actually in a game, and this is something I will bring up in the next Tabletop talk, is dice rolls will just like pervert any sort of encounter, right? Where you could be going for a very serious mood, and then somebody like critically fumbles, be it a player or an ally, and it's just like, well, this is slapstick and stupid, and I just like hit myself over the head with a coconut while trying to attack somebody or whatever, and like you don't have to resolve the critical fumble or the critical failure. It doesn't have to be resolved through an idea that, it doesn't have to be resolved in a slapstick manner, but to some degree, like a trained soldier missing a shot on a target that's not moving, that's not that far away, that's like not a hard shot, and like accidentally hurting themselves in the process is kind of slapstick just by nature, because you're basically taking all of this information that we've learned and you're saying, well, none of that matters and it's all stupid. And like for this one moment, they were just a complete retard. And like the idea that you can basically be a complete retard, but only for one, turn or whatever, or for many turns, depending on your luck, I guess, that just doesn't make any sense. Right. And so I can see that dice rolls are meant to sort of govern a lot of actions, but they don't, they pervert and pollute the actual thematics and what you're able to see and make happen. And that's really what I think I strongly dislike about dice the most. It's not the RNG part. It's not like I feel like my player agency is, removed or whatever. It's just, especially as a game master or somebody who will be a game master, somebody who's making all of these worlds and trying to like set the tones and stuff, I'm very sensitive to things that can absolutely butcher the presentation factor and the tone. And if my players see a very formidable enemy critically fail to attack and like don't do any damage, then they're going to think less of them. And it's not actually their fault. It's just the dice. So it's not even my character. It's not anything I did. I guess by virtue of allowing dice to be in the game, then you can say it's something I did, right? But you can kind of see where I'm going with this, where the dice rolls just end up being like so slapstick and stupid. So I do feel like when I think about ways to improve that idea, when I think about ways to, bypass the dice, or one of the things that I think will significantly be improved is if you can get a proper system in place and, you not have like imbalanced numbers where like, players just face roll everything or get face rolled by everything, assuming you have something of a balanced environment for all of the statistics, and you have like really interesting engagements or whatever, or even baseline engagements. Like it doesn't have to have a lot of stuff in it. Like you don't have to have a lot of opportunity for, novel and creative ways of using the battlefield and other mechanics that you have at your disposal. You can just be straightforward. Like, we're in a ravine shooting each other or we're in trenches or whatever. Like, that can also be the goal or the way that it works. Like it doesn't have to be a super verbose and like very explicitly defined battlefield with a lot of extra shit. Like it can be, and that can be like one way that you can go, one place that you can go that's really interesting, right? But if it's not, even if it's just a plain thing, like the sort of like the pathfinding example I gave in one of the clips where I was like, here's a flat battlefield, here's like 6 Mavericks moving around in CMBW, and then now try to do that in StarCraft 2, and you'll see like the fundamental differences in the mechanics. That's sort of what I want to do here. It's like a flat battleground with nothing interesting about it at all, and it's just some engagements happening. Like in 5th edition with all this fucking bullshit and the dice and stuff, like this happens. But then in my system, the things that you can do are just like more consistent. So you don't have the worry that you're going to accidentally turn something slapstick or make something stupid or, devalue a character or make something like some unlikely thing that totally governs the whole place. Like if there was going to be an unlikely thing, it should be earned, is my thinking, and it should be unlikely in the sense that like you got like the party makes a poor role playing action or decision, or they make a really fucking great one, like they have some insane read, and it gives them the opportunity to maybe have this crazy intuition or whatever, and that could also be facilitated, aided, abetted by their character actually having some sort of intuition, and then the game master kind of whispers some detail to them or whatever, is like that you pick up on this, and stuff like that, right? And so yeah, I don't know, man. I think about all of those possibilities, and I do get very excited. I do think that it's like way better. I know it's kind of orthogonal to the actual interactive games and stuff. It's not something that super many people on the server are probably very interested in, or maybe I'm going to be surprised and wrong about that one. But I feel like when I think about the tabletop stuff and I think about like how it could be run, I don't know. I think when we record our one shots and stuff and put those up, people will be able to see what they're like, right? And we will certainly try to do that. I don't know exactly how we're going to visually represent it. Like I'm still looking into that part, but it could definitely be useful and impactful to find some way of successfully implementing a whole bunch of various things like these replacements for dice, these systems that are just consistent and that always work. And a lot of it could be accentuated by a working client that's like super intelligent. One of the things that I had the idea for that I suggested to Veek is like it would just be almost like this text autocomplete thing. So you'd have like this entry, this array of objects, and those objects would include like players and interactable objects and stuff. And so like they would have different flags associated with them. So if you were going to say that like you are using a certain skill, then that skill would accept certain kinds of objects. So you could imagine like attacking with shooting with a gun. Like, okay, well that can apply to so many things. So you can shoot for, any of the objects that are in the scene. So you would say like, your action starts with like attack with, and then it lists like the things you can attack with. It could be like your bare hands, it could be your gun, it could be whatever other items you might have equipped or whatever. And then there could be like a list of objects afterwards, because you would like say like attack with target with this or whatever, attack, use this to attack that, something like that. You would actually be able to type that out, and that would then feed the game master like the baseline event with no changes, and they could make modifications to it themselves. Like, so the example that I gave is, you wouldn't want to necessarily have the client govern every single interaction, because there might be some special cases. So what you would probably want to do is hand them like the baseline effect. And so if your weapon deals 5 damage and the enemy has 10 health, then like by default it would just say like subtract 5 health from this target. But if it's already wounded and it's going to kill them, then like it would warn the game master, like saying like this attack would be lethal unless something changes about it. And then you could choose to like, maybe if you wanted to change something about it for an actual reason in gameplay, then you could. The other thing that you could do is you could like set up some effect quickly to be like, okay, when this character dies, like blow these panels on the wall up or something, like maybe this object is actually, a control panel that they're shooting. And so when they shoot this control panel, like this other thing should happen in the game world. And so like you like set that up or whatever. And I guess you could maybe even do that without even needing to intercept the game event. Like you could actually preemptively say like, if this character dies, like this should happen or whatever. And then when that character is procced to say lethal damage, it will remind you of all of the events you've hooked up to that death, and then you can like adjust them. Like maybe they've already bypassed one of the doors that gets opened by this, so that door should actually not be interacted with at all or whatever. And that could be something that you could like remember to turn off because of this feature or whatever. So yeah, there's like all these different things you could do with the client, but like you don't even need all of that stuff. Again, if we go back to the 3D modeling stuff that I was talking about, you don't need to have the very perfect, like fully accentuated, great render 3D graphic ready to go for your game. You just need like a stepping stone, right? And so we just need a stepping stone, and maybe this involves like firing up that the Tailspire thing. I don't know anything about it yet, really. There's Foundry as well. That's like a $50 license, but at least only the game master has to buy it, as opposed to Tailspire, which seems to be like $20, $25, and everybody has to buy it. So I'd have to think about that. maybe we could use Roll20. It doesn't seem like a good idea. And I mean, I think there some graphical representation should be used because it'll just be a lot easier to keep things, in track, keep track of everything. But player character sheets would be done through the website probably for now and stuff like that, unless we actually had like a solution in whatever client we decided to test things out with. So that's something we got to figure out. I don't know. I don't really have like a timetable for this because obviously I'm working on CMBW and I'm working on our first game, which for those who are not in the know, I told Miriam that one of the things that we could end up calling the first game as a code name would be Pangea because of its crazy setting. So it's obviously for people who don't know about the setting of our first game. It's basically there's this thing the size of a galaxy, but it's like an interconnected landmass. So instead of having like space travel per se, I mean, like there's a lot of empty space necessarily, but there's no like cosmic space with stars and stuff. It's like this giant, construct almost. Saying that, like there is a lot about it that's natural or whatever, but like clearly it's not a normal formation from what we would consider it. So anyway, like that's the thing. And so like obviously that makes me think of supercontinents, which obviously the most famous one that I learned about in school was Pangea. And so there's where that name comes from. But that's the initial idea anyway. I should actually look that up. I wonder if anybody's actually used Pangea as a name for a game before. I'm sure it's been used for like software. Like a map, like a cartography solution or something is probably called that. Like it's a fairly generic name as far as supercontinents go. It's not like I'm pulling one from like the second most popular supercontinent because nobody would know what the fuck it is, right? Everybody only knows the first one. So anyway, I'm bringing all that up because that is the code name for the game. And so I am working on Pangea. I am working on CMBW. I'm working on this tabletop stuff. So like, yeah, I got a lot of stuff that I'm juggling. I'm also doing some casting and doing my daily, or not daily, but my part-time job and stuff like that. So yeah. Balancing a lot of things, but that's what we do around here, especially in terms of game balance, where we talked about the volatility in the early stages. And I guess the next target will be looking at, how Zerg are doing in Tier 1. They definitely are fairly volatile, right? Like, that is something that we've noticed. I think I would actually like to see some ZVZs from, skilled players and stuff. Players who are familiar enough with the situation, just so that I can see, like, is it still as volatile as it was, or is there actually a little bit more value now? Because, I mean, you think about it, there's so many changes since we talked about ZVZ a few months ago now on this show, actually. We had the Withhold the Mirror episode where we talked about ZVZ being stupid. And I talked about maybe making, like, map-specific changes or whatever. And, in that very episode, I basically figured out, like, actually, it would probably be better if it just didn't have to be like that. But, I was sort of coming at it from a Brood War-centric point of view. It's like, why didn't they do that in Brood War? Because in Brood War, that's really fucked up. Like, if you guys don't know, in Brood War, you basically... Every game is, like, 3 minutes long right now, or 4 minutes long or whatever, and it's just like, can I build 9 drones and still win with mutas? Like, that's not an RTS, bro. I don't know what the fuck you're playing, but that is not an RTS, so that's really messed up. And so, yeah, anyway, like, I was just thinking about stuff like that. A lot of changes have happened since then, right? Kagran colonies are now 50 minerals instead of 75, and the build time for them is a bit longer, but the build time for the static defense is a bit shorter, and static defense got a little bit more durable. Time to kill generally went down, but then you have, like, unit regression, and you think about Vorver cores in the early game, and I'm sure they would set the pace. Like, maybe it's still restrictive in the sense that you both need to go Quasrock in the early stages, but... maybe it's still more sensible overall. And like one of the things I was hoping that would happen is that maybe if we see a lot of ZVZs, we would actually see, you can choose to go Hydrock as your supplement, or you can choose to go Zorkiz. And like one of those two can be the way to go. Or maybe you can even stay on Quasrock the whole time and, conserve your gas or whatever. But hopefully it wouldn't be as stupid and brain dead as Brood War or ZVZ. That's what I can hope anyway. I remember when Artosis was casting a bunch of them and uploading it to his casting channel, and it's like, it really is like, here's like, a 3-minute game basically. And yeah, stupid. So, but that is that. I think that'll do it for our episode of Prototype. I'm going for a little under 45 minutes. I usually like to keep these under an hour, unless I have a lot to talk about. And that's just the way things are. That's the format. So hope you guys have enjoyed hearing my thoughts about lobotomy mines, hearing my thoughts about 3D modeling, and hearing my thoughts about tabletops, and then a little bit of grab bag shit at the end, as was foretold, I guess. And like I said, you want to tune in for those tabletop streams and discussions. I mean, the Round Tabletop Talks are public streams, but the stuff that I do in the Tony's Talking Tower channel is restricted to those who are on the coffee page. So, yeah, Fagudo said paywalling hype SMH because I was like revealing details about Pangea actually in that channel. In the Ahmed's Arsenal channel, which is the text channel as opposed to the voice channel. And I was thinking about that. I was like, yeah, that's pretty funny. And maybe even true to some extent. But you know what? It all trickles out eventually, right? We'll do a crow's nest and talk about some of those details anyway. So yeah, that's about it for now. Thanks everybody who, obviously is on the coffee page, but just in general, who hangs out and talks, contributes to the discussion, contributes to CMBW, contributes to the future of the No Frauds Club. And we'll be back with another episode of this and a bunch of other shows very soon.